Thank you so much for joining the Northwest Church YouTube channel. If you'd like to follow along with the message today, you can check out the notes linked in the description below. Let's jump into the message.
All right, let's get started because we've got a brand new year and we're starting a brand new series called 52. Everybody shout 52. We're going to take a deep dive into the story of Nehemiah. So if you have your Bibles this morning, you have it on your iPad or your phone, let's go to open up to the Old Testament, the book of Nehemiah. It was written from a leadership perspective. So let me just stop. For the leaders in the room, if you lead your family, if you lead a business, if you lead a team at work, any leadership capacity you have, I want to encourage you to read the book of Nehemiah. There are more leadership principles and illustrations in the book of Nehemiah than any book that I know. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's written from a leadership perspective. So I want to encourage you during the next 52 days to read the book. I think it has 406 verses. So if you read 8 verses each day, then guess what? You're going to start the new year out by reading an entire book in the Bible. Wouldn't that be incredible? So 406 verses, 8 verses a day. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a 52-day journey into rebuilding what is broken in our lives. So I want to challenge you. I want to encourage you, starting today, that you're going to make up your mind that I'm going to invest in my life, in my marriage, in my kids, in my finances, in my health. Whatever may be broken or torn down, I'm going to spend the first 52 days, starting today, and I'm going to invest into what is broken. More on that later. I want to give you a little backdrop to our story this morning, so don't get lost in the weeds. Are y'all ready? Here we go. It was around 586 BC, so that would be before the birth of Christ. Babylon was the superpower of the world who invaded Jerusalem. And in the process, they destroyed the city, the walls that protected it. They took captive the best and the brightest of God's people to be their slaves. They took them back to Babylon. They left behind the weak, the elderly, and the walls of the city laid in ruins for over 6 decades, as prophesied by Jeremiah. Now, the story of Daniel, as well as the 3 Hebrew children thrown into the fiery furnace, y'all remember that story? It took place during this time. Fast forward, it's about 539 BC. The Persians, led by King Cyrus, they defeated the Babylonians in a fierce battle for world domination. 1 year after his victory, King Cyrus declared and proclaimed himself as the great liberator of the people. 1 year after this incredible world war that took place in which the Persians won, he said, I am the great liberator of the world. So here's what that looked like. He allowed any exiled who wished to return to his or her homeland to do so. Among those released were the Jews who had been taken captive at the fall of Jerusalem. Now, there were 3 different groups that came back from Babylon back to Jerusalem. Are you guys tracking with me? So the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. The walls were taken down. The gates were burned. Babylon carried off a big group of them to Babylon. The Persians come in. They beat up. They take over the Babylonians. And the new king says, you know what? Anybody who wants to go back where they came from, I'm going to give you that opportunity. That included the Jews who were taken captive some 6 decades earlier. 3 different groups. The first group was led by Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, how'd you like to have that name? Hey, Z. So we'll call him Z-Man. The Z-Man took the first group back, and his mission was to rebuild the temple. God said, I want you to rebuild and establish my temple first. And then I believe it was about 58 years later, there was a guy named Ezra. So Ezra took a team of people back, and his job was to what? Stir a revival. You built the building, so now we got to have a revival. And then a few years later, Nehemiah, and that's where we're going to start in our story today. He led the third and final group. It was about 445 years before the birth of Christ. This is what's interesting to me, and this is what caught my eye. This came out of a personal devotion that I had several months ago. It's just one of those things that stuck with me, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to preach a series out of this. 52 days. So think about the walls of Jerusalem. How long had they been laying in ruins? For over 6 decades. Nehemiah returned and rebuilt what had been broken for 6 decades in 52 days. That's leadership. He returned and rebuilt what had been broken for over 6 decades in 52 days. It's one of the most remarkable leadership feats of the entire Bible. For decades, the walls had been broken down. The ruins of the city were a daily reminder of what had been broken and what had been taken from them. This morning, maybe some of you can relate. The enemy has invaded, taken, and left your life broken. And just like the children of Israel, one day you're living in peace and prosperity, but the next day your entire life is now in ruins. As you look around, does it feel like all is lost in your marriage? Do you feel, no matter how hard you try, your relationship with a family member is beyond repair because of poor decisions or maybe no fault of your own? Your finances are in ruins this morning. After dedicating and raising your children in the house of God, does it look like they want no part of church or no part of God? Maybe the years of preparing and working hard, your company has overlooked you and left you behind. One day you feel great, the next day you're left to deal with the devastating news from a doctor. For some, life seems broken and you lived in ruins and you've lived there so long that it feels like it has become the new norm in your life. Meaning like whatever is broken has been broken so long that it has become the new norm and you have just learned to navigate around it and to live within the ruin and to live within the mess in your life. Well, I want us to get up. Everybody say get up. That's right. Today we're going to get up. We're going to acknowledge what is broken in our life. We're going to have a burning passion to fix what is broken in our life. And then we're going to create a plan to fix what is broken in our life. It starts today. Look at your neighbor right now and say, it starts today. Well, now look at your neighbor and act like you really mean it and say, it starts today. Come on, say it with some passion. Today, we are going to start a 52-day journey to rebuild what is broken in our life. We're going to look, we're going to learn from Nehemiah's story, and we're going to get some tools for our own backpack, for our own journey. So it begs the question, how did Nehemiah return and rebuild something that had been broken for over 6 decades in only 52 days? That is a wow moment, and this is a great story, so I hope you will read it. Number 1, are you ready? It's in your notes this morning. You guys are awesome at taking notes. So number 1, it's in your notes, okay? Number 1, acknowledge what is broken. You got to start with, I've got to acknowledge that I have something broken in my life. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 2 and 3 says that Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me, referring to Nehemiah, and some other men who had just arrived from Judah. I asked them about the Jews who had returned from captivity and about how things were going back in Jerusalem. They said to me, you know what, Nick, things are not going very well. Those who had returned said they are in great trouble. There's disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. Now, while serving in the palace of Susa, and I don't have time to get into all of the background of Nehemiah, but he's in a palace and he serves the king. He has a role in the king's court. He is there. So while serving in the palace of Susa, and by the way, this was like the first Florida that we see in the Bible. So all the kings would snowbird to Susa. Why? Because of the warmer climate. It's just a little history. It's free. Don't worry about it. Okay? It'll get better. But Nehemiah was visited by his brother and others who had just returned from a trip to Jerusalem. And they painted, as I just read, a very dark and dismal picture of the returned exiles. They were in deep trouble. They were under severe distress and were struggling with conditions and the circumstances of their homeland. They were suppressed by surrounding people and nations. In addition, the walls of Jerusalem had been torn down and the gates of the city had been entirely burned up. Chapter 5, we see the suffering of an economic depression due to a famine. I'm going to cheer you up here in a moment. The famine had caused hunger, disease, and even starvation. They were experiencing the loss of income and the loss of job. So again, when Nehemiah got the report, it was not a good report. But I don't care if it's a good report or not. How many of you know you got to acknowledge the report? Others were suffering oppression from greedy farmers in homeland. Some were even desperate enough, they were selling themselves and selling their children in order to pay off debt just to survive. They were facing racism, not a pretty picture, but one that had to be acknowledged. Listen up and lean in. The starting point to rebuild what is broken in your life starts with acknowledging the brokenness. It starts with, I've got to recognize that something is wrong, something is ugly, something is broken in my life. Here's the deal. Most people refuse to look or listen to what is broken in their lives. It's like out of sight, out of mind. How many's ever said that? Out of sight, out of mind. A lot of people are living their lives today. This happens in your personal life. This happens with your relationship with Christ. This happens in a business world. It's like there's a problem, but you know what? I'm just going to ignore that, and I really don't want to deal with it. It's kind of like kicking ice under the refrigerator. You look at me like y'all don't ever do that. Because you don't stoop down and pick it up. You just kind of kick it under the refrigerator, and something happens. It's gone, right? It's like, listen, these people, they're living in a virtual world, a social media world, but it's not a real world. So ignoring or refusing to acknowledge your brokenness leads to the land of nowhere. So start today. There's ugly in my life. There's brokenness in my life. And I've got to recognize that. I've got to look in the mirror, and I've got to quit passing the buck. I've got to quit, ignoring this thing, because ignoring it doesn't mean it's going to go away. Kicking the ice under the refrigerator doesn't mean it goes away. It just melts and you can't see it. Start today, because you can't fix what you won't face. You can't fix what you won't face. So stop hiding in and from the ruins and acknowledge, I have a problem. It starts with that. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's a broken marriage or a relationship. Maybe it's a pile of financial debt. Maybe it's emotional or physical fatigue. It could be that your spiritual life is out of balance and it's not where it needs to be with Christ. Whatever it is, look in the mirror and stop blaming everyone else and acknowledge what is broken. Because when I acknowledge something is broken, it's only then that I can take what is broken and bring it to my Heavenly Father and say, Lord, here I am. I am broken. I have a broken life. I have a broken relationship. I have a broken health. Whatever it may be, only when you acknowledge it, only then can you bring it to God and ask Him to do something out of it. You see, what we want to do is we want to hide from our brokenness. We want to hide from our ugliness. We want to hide from the things that are not wrong in our life. We want to act like we're not even in that valley. But I want you to know that it's in the pain of that valley. It's in the brokenness in which the best is revealed in your life. Oftentimes, God gives you a gift in that brokenness, and that gift is not for that season, but it's for the next season that He has planned for you, because God has got a better season ahead of you, but you got to get through the brokenness, and it starts with, you know what? I've got to acknowledge that I'm broken. Maybe it's your attitude. Maybe you're critical. Whatever it may be in your life, your health, your finances, even your spiritual relationship, it starts with acknowledging that something is broken. Now listen to me. I'm trying to help you today, so I'm not trying to be mean. But we live in this world where we want to pass everything off to somebody else. Well, I am the way I am because, my parents spanked me when I was 5. They should have spanked some of y'all a lot more, and just, we called it whooping in my days. Y'all know what that is. There wasn't no spanking. There was a whooping going on in our house. My whole point is we want to blame society, the culture we live in. It is so easy to say, you know what, this is somebody else's fault. This is somebody else's part at work. This is not mine. All this kind of stuff. No, it starts with acknowledging that there's something broken in your life. Because only till you get to a point of brokenness can you get to a point that, okay, now I can start working on fixing this thing. Okay? Is that all good? Okay, is that good? All right, so here we go. We'll finish this up, okay? 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10 says, in the kindness, God called you to share in His eternal glory. by means of Christ Jesus. So after you have suffered a little while, he will restore. That word restore, by the way, means to set right what has gone wrong. It means to put in order, and it means to complete. So God says that I am going to what? I am going to restore. I'm going to set right what is wrong. I'm going to put it in order. I'm going to and I'm going to complete that. The word support, by the way, is translated as guidance. How many needs guidance in this new year? Okay, and watch this, strengthen you. The word strengthen there is translated as to give you courage. Watch this, no matter what happens. So as all of you enter into this new year, it's like driving in a fog. How many's ever driven in a fog? You can't see too far ahead of you. You can only see sometimes what is in front of you. So as you get ready to drive into your new year, your marriage, your kids, your business, all of this, you're not going to be able to see into the year. You have no idea what's coming. But what we do know, that whatever is coming, that God is going to support us. He's going to take what is wrong and he's going to make it right. And he's going to give us the courage to face no matter what happens in this new year. He goes on to say, he says, I will place you on a firm foundation. The word foundation is translated as rock. I'm going to place you on a rock. God gives grace for whatever you will face. God will give you grace for whatever you face. But watch this. You can't receive grace until you acknowledge that you need grace. So if I'm going to receive grace for whatever's coming in my life, I've got to acknowledge I need God's grace. I need God's grace in this particular area. And by the way, we need God's grace in whatever we're going to face. We need God's grace in the good times, and we need God's grace in the bad times, okay? So number one, I've got to acknowledge what is broken in my life. It starts with, I've got to acknowledge this, okay? Quit denying it and quit hiding from it. Just acknowledge there's something broken in your life. It doesn't mean that you're not spiritual. It just means you're human. Okay. All right. The second thing you have to do is what? You have to have a passion to fix what is broken. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4 says, when I heard this, he says, I sat down, I wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed for the God of heaven. So hearing the discouraging news about his homeland, it broke Nehemiah's heart. It stirred a passion within him. He began to weep, he began to pray, and began to fast over the brokenness over his people. Now keep in mind, where did Nehemiah live during all of this time? Where was he living? Jerusalem. His home buddies, okay, they're all back there. They're living in the ruins, the broken down cities, the burned down gates. They're living in a mess. Where is Nehemiah living? He's in the kingdom. He's protected. He's shielded from the brokenness of Jerusalem. He could have easily said, this is not my doing, nor is it my problem. But the brokenness of his people created a passion within him to do something about it. Nehemiah heard the reports from the returned exiles, and he continued until one day he said, enough is enough. I've got to do something about this. So the first step is I've got to acknowledge my brokenness, but sooner or later it takes something from the inside to do something about what's going on the outside. You see, sometimes all we want to do is gripe and complain about what's going on the outside of our life. But listen, sooner or later, we've got to acknowledge that something is broken. And then there's got to be something within us that says, you know what? I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm not going to live this way anymore. I'm going to change something. But it starts with a passion on the inside. Before you can change anything out here, there's got to be a change that takes place on the inside. See, his passion to fix what was broken led him to God. He knew there's no way he could fix what had been broken for decades without God. So this city, these walls, this mess had been broken for over 6 decades. And yet he returned and he repaired and restored what had been broken for 6 decades in 52 days. It's a remarkable story. But it started with, I got to do something about this. You don't think everybody knew about the walls? You don't think there was lots of reports that kept coming back and telling everybody the walls are down, the gates have been burned up? But it took Nehemiah, it says, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to fix this. There are 12, by the way, his passion led him to God. God is the source of our passion. There are 12 recorded prayers in the book of Nehemiah. 9 of them are offered up by Nehemiah himself. So don't miss this. If you could rebuild what is broken in your life without God, you probably would have already done it. So the mere fact that it's still broken says, I need some help. I need God. Are you exhausted from trying to rebuild the brokenness with your own willpower? Are you tired of walking in and over your brokenness? Are you drained from the oppression and the seemingly hopelessness of something that is broken in your life? Now, again, because I'm a visual person, I visualize these people living in the city with broken down walls and a city gate that had been burned up, and they just walked around that brokenness. And every day, that pile of ruin, that pile of stone, all of that was just a reminder what had been broken and what had been taken in their life. But sooner or later, when you get tired of that, there's got to be something on the inside that says, you know what? I'm tired of walking around this broken down wall. I'm going to do something today, and I'm going to start cleaning this mess up. I'm going to get the bricks ready, and I'm going to rebuild this wall. I'm going to rebuild what's been broken in my life. But again, you got to have a passion and a desire to stop living with the status quo. So I'm just not going to live this way anymore. Some of you need to say, you know what, I have allowed the devil to steal, to kill, and to destroy long enough. So as you leave 2024 and look forward to the new year, reflect on what is broken and have the passion to do something about it, because it's never going to fix itself. And we think sometimes if I just, kind of kick it under the refrigerator, kind of shove it off to the side, if I just ignore it, then it's going to go away. Whatever is broken in your life is not going to fix itself. If your relationship with your spouse is broken, it's not going to fix itself. If you have a broken relationship with your children, it's not going to fix itself. If you have an issue at work, it's not going to fix itself. If you have a problem at work, it's not going to fix itself. So my point is that sooner or later, you got to have a desire to say, you know what? I'm not going to live this way anymore. I'm going to fix whatever's broken. And it starts with, I've got to acknowledge, I've got to sit down and say, you know what? I've got something broken in my life. And then number two, doggone it, I'm going to do something about it. All right? And then number three, y'all ready for this? A plan to fix what is broken. A plan to fix what is broken. I'm going to give you time to write that down. A plan to fix what is broken. You can have all the acknowledgement in the world, and you can say, yep, I'm broken. Yes, I'm a hot mess. Yes, I got issues. Yes, all that. And I'm fired up. It's a new year. It's a new me. And I'm going to go out there with the new year and a new me. And I'm going to fix all my problems. And I'm going to get all excited. And I'm going to do all of these things. But if you don't have a plan, you're going to fail. And you got to have a plan. So next week, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this plan. I'm telling you, some great leadership stuff here. But the first step of Nehemiah's plan was to approach the king. Now, I don't have time to really get into the weeds of this, but just the fact that Nehemiah would go to the king put his life in jeopardy. Just the fact that he approached the king put his life in jeopardy. But here we go. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 2 says, so the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. Now, again, if you go back and look at the culture of this, anytime a king walked into the room and you had a sad face, he could just say, you gone. I mean, like, gone. Not like you're fired. I mean, like, you no more. Like a bug on a windshield. You gone. Okay, and there's no coming back from that. Okay, there's no resurrection from that moment. Okay. But he says, I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is my ruins. He says, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. The king asked, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to God of heaven. That's a prayer from within here. He, under his breath. He said, I replied, if it pleases the king, and if you're pleased with me, your servant, send me back to Judah, that's back to Jerusalem, to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. So after negotiating the release of his day job, Nehemiah moved on to the second step of his plan. Having planned carefully. Write that down. Having planned carefully. That's a great phrase. Planning carefully, Nehemiah knew exactly what he needed to rebuild for the broken walls of Jerusalem. He made several requests to the king. Now watch this. He needed letters for a safe passage. He needed provisions for his journey. He needed a military escort and building materials from the king's forest. It was a well thought out plan. Watch this. And it was bathed in prayer. So after you acknowledge your brokenness, find the passion to do something, you have to then sit down and you got to create a plan to get from where you are to where you want to be. Because without a plan to get from where you are to where you want to be, come 2026, you're going to be in the same place that you were in 2025, and good chance where you were the year and 5 years earlier than that, but you got to have a plan. So if your relationship with God is not where it needs to be, you got to have a plan to get beyond that. If your marriage is broken, you got to come up with a plan. It's not going to fix itself. You're not going to walk in one day and go, whew, it's done. It's magic. No, life doesn't happen that way. So you got to create a plan. If you're in debt today, well, if you don't have a plan, you're going to be in debt next year and probably even in more debt. So wherever you are in your health, you say, well, I want to eat better. I want to lose weight. I want to go to the gym, whatever. Then you got to have a plan to get from where you are to where you want to be, because without a plan, you're never going to get there. And this plan has to be well thought out, and it has to be planned out, and it has to be bathed in prayer. Right? So this is what happens in New Year's. It's like we write down 10 things, new year, new me, yay, resolutions. I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. And in just a few days, you're going to quit. And you're going to be done with it. And you're going to be right back into that cycle where you were prior to setting all those new. Because again, you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan to leave where you are to go where you want to go. You can't fix it without a plan. And by the way, hey, watch this won't work. Y'all didn't get that? Hey, watch this. It's the last thing a redneck said. Yeah, hey, watch this. And sit down, prepare carefully, and ask, how do I move on from here? Here's a great question to ask yourself. You ready for this? How do I move on from here? What do I do now? What is my next step to move beyond the brokenness that I have in my life? Here's another one. What and who do you need in your plan? Because when you start asking questions, it makes you think. This is what I need. This is who I need. All of these things. Because the King is ready to give you what you need to repair and rebuild what is broken in your life. So what is the plan for your marriage for 2025? What is the plan for your kids? What's the plan for your health? What's the plan for your finances? What is the plan for your relationship with Jesus Christ in 2025? What is your plan to move from where you are to where you want to be? Pray and ask God to help you with your plan. Don't create or initiate a plan without God. Now, I'm almost done. So the wheels are coming down. We're getting ready to, y'all gather your stuff up. We're fixing to leave here in just a moment, okay? But here's the deal. What we want to do sometimes is we want to create a plan, and then we want to ask God to bless our plan. Nehemiah started with prayer. I got to get the king's orders. I've got to get lumber. I got to get this. I need these people. I got to do all of these things. Before he started assembling a list of what he needed to rebuild the walls, he started with, I got to go to the Lord. I got to go to my God. And I got to ask him, Lord, what is your plan? You got to think about it. The walls of that city had been broken down for over 6 decades. If it was easy, somebody would have already done it. So obviously it wasn't easy. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of that next week. But again, you got to have a plan if you're ever going to change. And here's the thing. Start with God's plan. Lord, what is your plan for me in this season of my life? Because Proverbs chapter 19, verse 21 says, you can make many plans, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. So whose purpose is going to prevail? Is it going to be mine? Yours? No. Is my plan going to prevail? No, that's not what he promises. He says his purpose will prevail. So if his purpose will prevail, I've got to get on his page. And sometimes we go to the Lord with a preconceived idea, with a preconceived plan. Here's what I want to do. Here's how I want to do it. And here's what I want to do it and why I want to do it. And then we ask the Lord to bless that. And then we wonder why that seldom works. Why? Because it's our plan. It's not God's plan. He says, look, it's my plan. It's my purpose that's going to prevail in your life. So whatever that looks like, whatever this dating looks like, whatever this marriage looks like, whatever this business looks like, whatever my body's plan, it's all, Lord, I want to know your plan and I want to know your purpose. I want to get on your page. And I'm not asking you to get on mine, because when we get on his page, this is what we know. His plan and purpose will prevail. So we got to ask the Lord, Lord, where do I go from here? Where do you want me to go? So here's what I'm going to leave you with this. What are you going to focus? in the next 52 days, starting today. Everybody say day one. Say starting today. Come on, say starting today. Starting today, day one. For the next 52 days, I'm asking you, what are you going to invest in? What are you going to focus on? You're going to focus on your health, your relationship with Christ. You're going to focus on being less negative, less critical, whatever it may be in your life. But I want to spend 52 days, I'm going to invest in my marriage. Okay, what does that look like? Are you going to do a devotion together? Are you going to ask God to fix them? Are you going to ask God to fix you? Because Christy says when Joe's right, it's a lot easier for Christy to be right. That's what she says. My whole point is, what is your plan? Well, I want to grow closer to the Lord in 2025. Okay, what's the plan? Are you going to come to church more often? Are you going to join a connect group? Are you going to be involved on a serve team? Are you going to have your daily devotion? Are you going to carve out some time to have your devotion, your Bible reading, and your prayer time? I call it God time. But again, you can say all day, I want to grow closer to the Lord, but if you don't have a plan, it's not going to happen. You can say all day, I want my marriage to be more healthy, but if you don't have a plan, it's not going to work. You can say every day, I want to get in shape, but if you don't have a plan, chances are it's just not going to work. I'm not putting anybody down. I'm saying you got to have a plan to go with it. And it starts with, Lord, what is your plan? What are you wanting to do? What are you wanting out of this for me? Will you bow your heads?
Thank you so much today for tuning in and checking out the message. We hope you were encouraged. And today, if you'd like to make a decision to become a Christ follower, please contact us. You can do that by simply clicking the link in the description below. And today, if you'd like more information about Northwest Church, or you would like to plan a visit to come visit us in person, you can simply do that by going to northwestchurch.tv. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to connect with you.